Hi, and welcome back to the Pelvic Empowerment IBS video series. My name is Tori, and I am a doctor of physical therapy who specializes in pelvic dysfunction, which means I treat things that can go wrong around the pelvis, and this includes bowel dysfunction, which means I see many humans in my clinic who have IBS. Back in May, I decided to do my best to try and unpack what I have learned about IBS in a video series. And today I wanted to add a third installment building on my previous video all about IBS and trigger foods. This time focusing on the more specific question that I proposed in that video: what foods are you as an individual human specifically sensitive or intolerant to? Today we will first define the difference between an actual food allergy and food sensitivities or intolerances, and then we will wait for this person with the loud music to pass by. Then we will explore the different tests that exist to find out if you have food sensitivities or intolerances. And we'll spend a little bit of extra time really deep diving into the food sensitivity home testing kits before we end the video. If you haven't yet, please do watch my first and second video that already exist in this video series, as I do plan on building on topics thoroughly discussed in those videos in this video. You can find links to those videos as well as timestamps and links to all of the studies that I mention in this video in the description below. All right, let's dive in. It's important that we first define the difference between an actual food allergy and a food sensitivity or intolerance. As the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology explains, a food intolerance response takes place in the digestive system. It occurs when you are unable to properly break down the food. This could be due to enzyme deficiencies, sensitivity to food additives, or reactions to naturally occurring chemicals in foods. Often, people can eat small amounts of the food without causing problems, whereas a food allergic reaction involves the immune system. Your immune system controls how your body defends itself. For instance, if you have an allergy to cow's milk, your immune system identifies cow's milk as an invader or allergen. Your immune system overreacts by producing antibodies called immunoglobulin E, or IgE. These antibodies travel to cells that release chemicals, causing an allergic reaction. Let's unpack this a little bit more. One of the reasons that I bring up the difference is because if you are truly sensitive or intolerant to a food, you should be able to eat a little bit or a small amount without causing any sort of reaction. Whereas if you are truly allergic to a food, even a small amount would cause an allergic reaction. The tricky thing with IBS is that sometimes even a small amount of food can cause an attack. So is that an allergic reaction? Is that a food sensitivity or an intolerance? Or is that something altogether different? While true allergic reactions can sometimes occur in the digestive tract and cause symptoms such as stomach cramping, which could mask as an IBS-like symptom, most of the time allergic reactions involve vomiting, nausea, itchiness, shortness of breath, dizziness, hives, rashes, trouble swallowing, swelling, symptoms that clearly indicate that something other than IBS is at play. The great news is, if you are at all suspecting a food allergy, you can follow up with an allergist and get those immunoglobulin E antibodies that we were talking about earlier tested, and pretty easily find out if you have an allergy or a true immune system response going on. The test will either be positive or negative, so you're gonna get a really straightforward answer, which I feel is a rarity in the world of IBS. On the other hand, food sensitivities or intolerances take place in the digestive system. So symptoms typically present as nausea, stomach pain, gas, cramping, diarrhea, bloating, and then maybe even some heartburn, vomiting, or headache. But the first few symptoms that we named could totally mask as IBS symptoms. Stomach pain, gas, cramping, bloating, diarrhea, these symptoms go hand in hand with IBS, which can make the question, is this a food intolerance or is this my IBS, a little bit more challenging to answer. So how do you test for individual food sensitivities or food intolerances? One option for food intolerance testing that I think has a lot of value is hydrogen breath testing. And I would recommend that anyone with IBS undergo this testing. Here's why and how it works. This 2014 article does a great job explaining the mechanism behind hydrogen breath testing. Bacteria in the bowel generally produce hydrogen gas on fermentation of carbohydrates. Let's pause here and really emphasize carbohydrates. That means hydrogen breath testing can be used to test for sugar-based intolerances, but can't be used to test for something like a gluten intolerance because gluten is a protein, not a sugar. Back to the article. In the bowel, bacteria can only do this when dietary carbohydrates are not absorbed in the small intestine and stay as undigested material as they travel along the digestive tract into the large intestine. Though some of the hydrogen gas produced by the bacteria is expelled as flatulence or in the making of other molecules, most of the gas is absorbed across the lining of the large intestine into the bloodstream. The gas is then transported to the lungs via the bloodstream, and from blood it is exchanged into the airways of the lungs and breathed out. The only source of hydrogen gas in the breath can be from bacterial fermentation in the bowel. The same applies to the gas called methane, which is exhaled by some people but not all people. The bacteria in the large bowel make methane from hydrogen. The amount of hydrogen and methane gases breathed out or exhaled from the lungs can be easily measured by taking a breath sample and measuring the gas concentrations via a breath testing machine. In other words, if you're digesting your carbohydrates well, there should be little to no hydrogen and potentially little to no methane if you're someone who naturally exhales methane in your breath. If you aren't digesting your carbohydrates well, then there will be an abnormally high amount of hydrogen and potentially methane in your breath. So then, if you aren't digesting your dietary sugars or dietary carbohydrates well, aka you have carbohydrate malabsorption, or a food intolerance or sensitivity, then we can test for it. The most common example that comes to my mind is, of course, lactose intolerance, lactose being the sugar found in milk and dairy. But this test can also be used to evaluate fructose, sucrose, and sorbitol. Furthermore, this breath testing can be used to diagnose small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO, and it can tell you how quickly or slowly food is moving in your small intestine. So I say, if you're working with an IBS diagnosis and you haven't gotten a hydrogen breath test, why not take one and determine with clarity whether or not SIBO is at all at play with your current condition? Are you intolerant to certain sugars, yes or no? Again, a rare case where you can get that answer with extreme clarity. And 3, how well is food moving in your small intestine? All of this information can be very valuable and can be used to help further your diet to your specific individual needs. The other food sensitivity test that is getting a lot of love right now is the at-home food sensitivity testing kit. If you think you have a food sensitivity or intolerance because you took an at-home food sensitivity testing kit, I would like to gently encourage you to reconsider. IBS already demands so much attention to diet, and the last thing that I want you to do is further restrict foods that you aren't actually intolerant or sensitive to. Let's take some time to explain why these tests are not scientifically supported. We mentioned earlier that a true food allergy causes the body or the immune system to produce antibodies called immunoglobulin E, or IgE. According to this 2018 article published in the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, just as quantitative enzyme immunoassays can be used to measure IgE antibodies to foods, these same assays assays can be used to measure IgG antibodies or IgG4 antibodies to foods. These tests are performed in many reputable laboratories, and there is no reason to doubt their validity and reliability. That is, the tests are in fact accurately and reproducibly measuring IgG antibodies directed against food proteins. However, the measurement of IgG to foods is promoted to diagnose food sensitivities that might manifest, according to websites promoting the testing, as, and then we see a laundry list of diagnoses including IBS. Here's the catch. However, the production of IgG antibodies to foods is a normal immunologic phenomenon. IgG antibodies to foods are found in virtually all healthy individuals. In fact, contrary to the notion that the development of IgG or IgG4 antibodies could lead to food intolerance, the development of such antibodies has specifically been linked to the development of food desensitization or tolerance. So then, these food sensitivity testing kits are valid and reliable in that they do accurately measure IgG antibodies. However, IgG levels have nothing to do with food sensitivity or intolerance. Instead, it seems that these are markers of desensitization or tolerance. So if you took one of these tests, you'd essentially see in a list form the foods that you've been eating the most of recently with higher IgG antibodies for the foods that you are more tolerant to. And then, if the results of this test are misinterpreted, you could be encouraged to stop eating or restrict foods that you are actually not sensitive to, foods that you are actually quite tolerant of. By definition, a food intolerance or sensitivity is difficulty digesting a certain food and having some sort of unpleasant physical reaction during that period of difficult digestion. While someone could absolutely have both IBS and a food intolerance in tandem, recall that digestion does not take place within minutes of eating. Digestion takes hours, and so a true food intolerance would cause symptoms hours after eating said food. IBS attacks that occur 15 to 20 minutes after eating a food are therefore very unlikely related to a true food intolerance. Rather, in my opinion, IBS attacks further support the idea of IBS at its core being a brain-gut axis dysfunction, potentially related to an over or underactive gastrocolic reflex, which is something that I outline in detail in my very first video in this series. Pairing this knowledge with the knowledge that you'd have to eat a reasonable amount of that food to have a true intolerant or sensitive reaction, or in other words, eating small amounts of a food shouldn't be significant enough to cause a true intolerant or sensitive reaction, it seems to me that the best way to uncover food sensitivities or intolerances that can't be measured with hydrogen breath testing would be via a very well-kept food journal and a very good registered dietitian. I propose that if you are suspecting a true food intolerance or sensitivity other than lactose, sucrose, fructose, or sorbitol, the best thing that you can do is keep a very detailed food and symptom journal for at least 2 to 3 weeks, writing down very specifically everything that you eat, when you eat it, and when and what symptoms you experience. Then bring this food journal to a registered dietitian, ideally one who specializes in either IBS or GI disorders, who can help you identify true potential food sensitivities or intolerances that can be further sussed out with an elimination diet. To really bring home my point about food sensitivity testing kits, let me highlight this 2004 study that investigated IgG-based food elimination diets in humans with IBS. This study looked at a total of 150 humans with IBS and randomized them into 2 groups to partake in a 3-month diet. One group partook in a true diet, a diet that actually excluded the foods with higher IgG antibody test results, and the other group, the control, partook in a sham diet, a diet that excluded the same number of foods but not the food that yielded higher IgG antibodies. Now, the results of this testing would have you believe that IgG-based food sensitivity testing is worthwhile for those with IBS because the results demonstrate demonstrate that 10% of those on the true diet reported a decrease in their symptoms, and those that were very, very compliant saw a 26% reduction in symptoms. However, the true diet eliminated in very high percentages milk, eggs, and wheat, whereas the sham diet eliminated those food groups in much lower percentages. This 2005 article says it best. The recent paper by Atkinson and colleagues regarding IgG food antibodies and irritable bowel syndrome fails to compare like with like. Regardless of the IgG results, the treatment group excluded significantly different foods to the control group, particularly those foods which appear to exacerbate symptoms of IBS. I think this leads very nicely into the next topic that I plan on discussing in this video series, which would be IBS and specifically lactose and gluten intolerance. As, generally speaking, foods that do contain lactose or gluten seem to exacerbate IBS symptoms. All right, thank you so much for watching. I am really enjoying creating this IBS video series. As I mentioned, I do plan on next covering gluten and lactose intolerances and their relationship to IBS. I also plan on covering FODMAPs as well as the potential overlap between SIBO and IBS. I am also planning to cover soluble and insoluble fiber, specific dietary considerations for IBS management, stress, anxiety, and mood and their effects on IBS, Linzess and Trulance, sleep, and also potentially some more holistic options when it comes to treating IBS. But if you have a different IBS related topic that you'd like me to cover, please suggest it in the comments below. I do try really hard to read and respond to all of my comments. I am genuinely so excited and honored to be doing these request videos, so thank you so much again for watching, requesting, and commenting. It really means the world to me. Please, if you found this video helpful, like it, share it, comment on it, and please finally subscribe to my channel for more content surrounding pelvic health and also sometimes surrounding life things. Don't forget to check me out on Instagram, and thank you so much again for watching. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye! You bring me comfort to my soul.